She took her only son to the ICU, only to see her billionaire CEO ex, the son's father, with his sick wife in the same ward. "Is that my son?" The words escaped George Carter's lips in a broken whisper as he stared at the small boy with his unmistakable green eyes. The hospital corridor seemed to stretch and contract around them, the antiseptic smell fading as his world tilted on its axis. "Yes, George. This is Mateo. He's 7 years old." Selena's voice was steady, but her eyes blazed with 7 years of unspoken pain. "And he has no idea who you are." 7 years. George repeated, his face draining of color as the math crystallized in his mind. "I have a son. All this time. Mr. Carter?" A nurse's voice cut through the moment. "Your wife is asking for you." George stood frozen between two doors, one leading to the wife he'd chosen, another to the child he never knew existed. In that suspended moment, the tech billionaire who commanded global boardrooms found himself utterly powerless, facing the consequences of a choice made 7 years ago that had created ripples he never imagined. If you've ever witnessed a moment where past and present collide so violently that it changes everything you thought you knew about your life, stay with me. This story of regret, redemption, and the true meaning of wealth will touch your heart in ways you never expected. The antiseptic smell hit George Carter before anything else as he rushed through the sliding doors of Memorial Hospital's intensive care unit. His normally commanding presence, the same one that dominated boardroom meetings at Carter Technologies, seemed diminished under the harsh fluorescent lighting. His custom-tailored suit couldn't armor him against the vulnerability that hospitals always evoked. "I'm here for Vanessa Carter," he told the nurse at the station, his voice tight with worry. "My wife was admitted an hour ago." The nurse nodded sympathetically, fingers tapping efficiently at her keyboard. "Room 412, down the hall to your right." George hurried down the corridor, his Italian leather shoes squeaking against the polished floor. Every monitor beep and hushed conversation between medical staff heightened his anxiety. Vanessa's condition had deteriorated rapidly. What began as a severe allergic reaction during their anniversary dinner had cascaded into respiratory distress. He'd followed the ambulance in his Bentley, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white. As he turned the corner toward room 412, George froze mid-stride. Standing outside room 408 was a woman he hadn't seen in 7 years. Her dark hair was shorter now, falling just past her shoulders instead of cascading down her back. Though time had softened her features with fine lines around her eyes, he would recognize Selena Solis anywhere. The woman who had once been the center of his world before ambition had redrawn his priorities. Their eyes locked across the hallway. For one suspended moment, the hospital sounds faded away. Then George noticed the small boy beside her, holding her hand with trusting innocence. A boy with unmistakable green eyes, his eyes. The child couldn't be more than 7 years old, with Selena's warm complexion but George's jawline and piercing gaze. The boy looked between them, confusion evident on his face. "Mom? Who's that man?" Selena's hand tightened on her son's shoulder. "Mateo, go see if the vending machine has those crackers you like." "But I'm not hungry," the boy protested, his curious eyes still fixed on George. "Please, Mijo. Just for a minute." Selena's voice was gentle but firm. Mateo reluctantly walked toward the vending alcove, casting curious glances over his shoulder. "Selena," George breathed, her name foreign yet familiar on his tongue. "George." Her voice was controlled, revealing nothing. A nurse emerged from room 412. "Mr. Carter? Your wife is asking for you." George hesitated, caught between past and present, his mind struggling to process the implications of the small boy now examining the vending machine selections. "You should go," Selena said quietly. "Your wife needs you." The word wife carried weight between them, a reminder of promises made and broken. George nodded stiffly and stepped toward Vanessa's room, but turned back. "Is that?" He couldn't finish. Selena met his gaze steadily. "Yes, that's Mateo. He's 7. She paused meaningfully. "He's yours." The revelation struck George like physical pain. 7 years. A son he never knew existed. "Why is he here?" George managed to ask. "Severe asthma attack. He inherited your allergies to peanuts." A bitter smile touched her lips. "One of many things he got from you." Before George could respond, Mateo returned, eyeing George with innocent curiosity. "Mom, They don't have the orange crackers. George stared at the boy, his jawline, his curious expression, even the way he stood with his head tilted slightly, all reflections of himself. A surge of emotion rose in his chest, threatening to overwhelm him. "Mr. Carter," the nurse called again, more insistently this time. "I need to see you both," George said quickly. "After, please." Selena hesitated, then gave a barely perceptible nod before guiding Mateo back toward his room. George entered Vanessa's room, his mind fracturing between the pale woman in the hospital bed and the son he'd just discovered in the hallway. Vanessa lay against the white pillows, and four in her arm and monitors tracking her vital signs. Her platinum blonde hair, usually perfectly styled, lay limp around her face. At 34, she was strikingly beautiful even in her current state, the trophy wife many had accused him of acquiring to complete his billionaire image. "George," she whispered, reaching a manicured hand toward him. "The doctor said I'll be fine. Just a severe allergic reaction to the shellfish." He took her hand automatically, his mind still reeling. "I was worried," he said, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Vanessa observed, studying his face with shrewd blue eyes. In some ways, he had. The ghost of a life he could have led. The ghost of 7 years of fatherhood, vanished in an instant with a single choice. "Just concerned about you," he managed, forcing himself to focus on his wife. "The doctor said they want to keep you overnight for observation." Vanessa nodded, settling back against the pillows. "You should go home, get some rest. I'll be fine here." Relief and guilt washed through him simultaneously. "If you're sure." "I'm sure," she said, already reaching for her phone on the bedside table. "Can you have Marta bring my overnight bag in the morning? The gray Prada one." George nodded, marveling at her composure. Their relationship had always been like this, practical, composed, lacking the messy emotional entanglements that had characterized his time with Selena. It had been one of the things that attracted him to Vanessa after the pain of his breakup with Selena, the clean simplicity of their arrangement. "Of course," he replied, kissing her forehead automatically. "I'll check on you first thing tomorrow." As he stepped back into the hallway, George felt as though he were moving through a dream. 7 years ago, he had been building his company, focused on nothing but success. Selena had been his college sweetheart, the woman who had supported him through the early struggling years of his tech startup. They'd been happy until the pressures of his growing company had begun to strain their relationship. Then had come that phone call, when Selena had told him she was pregnant. It had been the worst possible timing. He was in Singapore, on the verge of securing the international contract that would transform Carter Technologies from a promising startup into a global contender. The prospect of fatherhood had terrified him, threatened everything he'd worked for. Now, 7 years later, he had everything he thought he wanted: a billion-dollar company, global recognition, a beautiful wife, homes in 3 countries. But walking down that hospital corridor toward room 408, George felt poorer than he'd ever been in his life. He paused outside the door, gathering his courage before knocking softly. Selena opened it, her expression guarded. Behind her, George could see Mateo sitting up in the hospital bed, a tablet in his small hands, headphones covering his ears. "He's watching his favorite show," Selena explained, stepping into the hallway and pulling the door nearly closed behind her. "The medication makes him drowsy." George nodded, his eyes drawn to the small window in the door where he could still see his son. How severe was the attack? Bad enough for the ER, not bad enough for extended hospitalization. "They'll release him tomorrow morning." Selena crossed her arms, creating a physical barrier between them. "How's your wife?" "She'll be fine," George replied, tearing his gaze from Mateo to focus on Selena. "Shellfish allergy. Also being released tomorrow." An awkward silence stretched between them. "Selena," George finally said, his voice low and urgent. "I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me about him?" Fire flashed in her eyes. "I did tell you, George. 7 years ago, on the phone, while you were in Singapore closing your first major acquisition. You said, and I quote, 'This isn't a good time, Selena. We'll talk when I get back.'" The memory surfaced hazily. Those had been frantic days, his fledgling tech company on the verge of either breakthrough or bankruptcy. "I remember you saying you were pregnant," he admitted. "But I thought we would discuss it when I returned. Then I got your email saying you needed space." After you transferred money to my account without another word, Selena finished. What was I supposed to think? That you wanted to be involved? You made your choice very clear. George's stomach twisted with shame. I thought that was what you wanted, financial support without complications. I was trying to be responsible while focusing on securing our future. Our future? Selena laughed incredulously. 3 months later, you were photographed with Vanessa Hughes at the Tech Innovation Gala. 6 months after that, your engagement was announced in Forbes. Don't pretend this was some misunderstanding, George. You chose your empire over your family. Each word was a deserved knife to George's heart. I didn't know about Mateo. Not really. Not that he existed and was growing up without me. Would it have made a difference? She challenged. The question hung between them, heavy with 7 years of what-ifs. Before George could answer, the door opened behind Selena. Mateo stood there, headphones around his neck. Mom, can I have some water? He asked, before noticing George still standing there. His curious eyes moved between the adults, sensing the tension. George found himself unable to speak, confronted with the living embodiment of his greatest mistake. Of course, Mijo, Selena said, her voice softening as she turned to her son. This is Mr. Carter. He works at the hospital. The lie stung, but George understood its necessity. This wasn't the moment for revelations. Hello, Mateo, George said, finding his voice at last. It's nice to meet you. Mateo offered a shy wave. Hi. Are you a doctor? No, George replied, a sad smile touching his lips. I'm not that useful, I'm afraid. He's an administrator, Selena interjected smoothly. Let's get you that water, and then back to bed. It's late. As they disappeared back into the room, George remained rooted in place, overwhelmed by a sense of loss so profound it was physical. Through the window, he watched Selena help Mateo back into bed, adjusting his pillows with practiced care. The easy affection between them, the result of 7 years of daily love and attention, made George's chest ache with envy and regret. He turned away finally, walking blindly toward the hospital exit. The night air hit him like a slap, bringing clarity to his shocked mind. He had a son, a 7-year-old boy who had no idea who George was. A child who had grown up without his father, while that father had been accumulating wealth and accolades, believing he was building a legacy when his true legacy was growing up without him. George sat in his car, hands gripping the steering wheel, but made no move to start the engine. For the first time in years, the tech CEO who prided himself on decisive action had no idea what to do next. The following morning, after a sleepless night, George returned to the hospital earlier than necessary. Vanessa was being discharged at noon, but he arrived at 8, hoping to catch Selena and Mateo before they left. He found Selena in the cafeteria, alone with a cup of coffee, her expression distant as she stared out the window. May I? George asked, gesturing to the chair across from her. Selena looked up, momentarily startled, then nodded. Mateo's getting his final checkup before discharge. George sat down, noticing the shadows under her eyes. You didn't sleep either. No. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. I kept thinking about what to tell him. About you. Hope flickered in George's chest. You're considering letting me meet him? Properly, I mean. I don't know, George. Selena sighed, meeting his gaze directly. He's asked about his father over the years, of course. I've told him that his father wasn't ready to be a parent, that it wasn't Mateo's fault. Thank you for that, George said quietly, for not making me a villain in his eyes. I didn't do it for you, Selena replied without heat. I did it for him. Children shouldn't carry the weight of their parents' mistakes. George nodded, accepting the rebuke. What does he know about me? That you're successful, smart, that he gets his green eyes and his love of building things from you. A reluctant smile touched her lips. He's already showing your technical aptitude. He took apart our remote control last month to see how it worked. Pride surged through George unexpectedly. Was he able to put it back together? Mostly. Selena laughed despite herself. We only had 3 buttons left over. The moment of shared amusement faded quickly, reality reasserting itself between them. I want to meet him properly, George said firmly. To talk to him. To be part of his life, if you'll allow it. Selena's protective instinct flared. Why now? Because you happened to run into us? He's been alive for 7 years, George. He's had first steps and first words and first days of school. Where were you then? I was wrong, George admitted, his voice breaking. So terribly wrong. I've built an empire worth billions, but seeing you both yesterday, I realize I'm bankrupt in everything that matters. Selena studied him, searching for sincerity or manipulation. George sat before her stripped of his corporate armor, just a man facing the consequences of his choices. And what about your wife? Selena asked pointedly. How does she fit into this picture of fatherhood you're suddenly painting? George hesitated. I told Vanessa about Mateo last night. Selena's eyebrows rose in surprise. And she was understanding, George said carefully. Our marriage is. He trailed off, unsure how to characterize the practical arrangement that had always been more about mutual benefit than deep connection. Complicated, Selena supplied. Yes. It was the simplest truth he could offer. Before Selena could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it. Mateo's finished with the doctor. We're cleared to go home. She stood, gathering her purse, then paused. If, and that's a big if, I allow you to meet Mateo properly, it needs to be on his terms. On our terms. This isn't about easing your conscience, George. It's about what's best for my son. Our son, George said quietly. Selena's eyes flashed. You haven't earned that word yet. George accepted the rebuke with a nod. What would you need from me to consider it? Selena thought for a moment. Time. To prepare him. To think about how to approach this. An assurance that you're not going to walk in and out of his life on a whim. He's a child, not a business acquisition you can divest from when it becomes inconvenient. I understand, George said solemnly. I'll wait as long as needed. And I promise you, Selena, I won't disappoint him again. Don't make promises you can't keep, she replied, but her tone had softened slightly. I'll call you in a few days, after I've had time to think. As she walked away, George called after her, Selena? Thank you. For raising such an amazing child. For doing what I was too cowardly to do. She paused, looking back at him with an unreadable expression. He is amazing. And he has your eyes. And your aptitude for technology. A reluctant smile touched her lips. And your stubbornness. As she disappeared down the corridor, George remained seated, a complex mixture of hope and fear churning within him. He had built his business empire on calculated risks, on confident decision-making. But nothing in his life had prepared him for this, the terrifying prospect of meeting the son he never knew, of trying to build a relationship from nothing, of facing the consequences of his greatest failure. For the first time in 7 years, George Carter, tech billionaire, found himself praying for a second chance he knew he didn't deserve. If you believe people deserve second chances, even when they've made terrible mistakes, leave a comment below. We all fail sometimes, but it's what we do after our failures that defines us. 3 days passed with excruciating slowness. George went through the motions of his daily life, board meetings, conference calls, evening events with Vanessa, but his mind remained fixed on Selena and Mateo. Each night, he found himself searching online for advice about meeting a child for the first time, about how to build relationships with children of different ages, about the psychological impact of absent fathers. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who had built a fortune on predictive technology algorithms now found himself utterly unprepared for the most important meeting of his life. On the fourth morning, as George reviewed quarterly projections in his corner office, his personal cell phone rang. Selena's name appeared on the screen. His heart hammered as he answered. Selena? I've talked to Mateo, she said without preamble. I've explained that I ran into his father at the hospital, and that you'd like to meet him. George gripped the phone tighter. What did he say? He has questions, of course. Many questions. Selena's voice was carefully neutral. But he's willing to meet you. This Saturday, at West Side Park near the playground. 2 o'clock. Relief flooded through George. Thank you, Selena. I'll be there. George, she added, her tone warning. This is a chance to meet him, not to make promises you can't keep. He's 7 years old. He's vulnerable. Tread carefully. I understand, George assured her, though his mind was already racing ahead to Saturday. And George, Selena's voice softened slightly. Leave the Bentley at home. And wear something casual. He doesn't need to be intimidated by you. After disconnecting the call, George immediately cleared his weekend schedule, canceling a golf game with potential investors that would have sealed a new round of funding. His assistant stared at him as though he'd grown a second head. Cancel the Tokyo trip next week too, he added, making a sudden decision. Have Richard handle the Asia-Pacific meetings. But sir, You've been planning the Tokyo expansion for months, his assistant protested. Plans change, Marissa, George replied simply, turning back to his computer. Saturday arrived bright and clear. George stood before his closet, staring at rows of custom suits and designer shirts, realizing he owned almost nothing that could be considered casual. Eventually, he unearthed a pair of seldom-worn jeans and a simple blue button-down shirt. He drove his least ostentatious vehicle, a Range Rover rather than the Bentley or Ferrari, and arrived at the park 30 minutes early. The playground bustled with weekend activity, children swinging and sliding, parents chatting on nearby benches. George sat on an empty bench, feeling utterly out of place. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been to a public park, perhaps not since his own childhood. At precisely 2 o'clock, he spotted them walking along the path. Selena wore simple jeans and a yellow blouse, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. Beside her, Matteo walked with the boundless energy of childhood, occasionally skipping a step or jumping to swat at a low-hanging branch. George stood as they approached, his palms suddenly damp with nervous sweat. "Hello," he said, his usually confident voice uncertain. Matteo studied him with open curiosity, those familiar green eyes, George's eyes, taking in every detail. "Are you really my dad?" The direct question, delivered with a child's bluntness, momentarily stunned George. He glanced at Selena, who gave a small nod of encouragement. "Yes," George replied, kneeling to meet Matteo at eye level. "I am." Matteo tilted his head. "Mom said you weren't ready to be a dad when I was born." "That's true," George admitted, determined to be honest. "I was scared and focused on my work. It was the biggest mistake I've ever made." Matteo considered this. "My friend Jake's dad lives in Colorado. Is that where you live? Far away?" "No," George said, his heart constricting. "I live here in the city. I didn't know about you until I saw you at the hospital." Confusion crossed Matteo's face. "But Mom said she told you about me." George shot a panicked glance at Selena, who stepped in smoothly. "Remember how I explained that grown-up situations can be complicated, Mijo? Sometimes people don't communicate well, especially when they're scared." Matteo nodded sagely, as though this made perfect sense. "Like when I didn't tell you I broke the vase because I was scared you'd be mad?" A small laugh escaped Selena. "Something like that." George watched their easy interaction with a pang of envy and admiration. Selena had done this for 7 years, fielding difficult questions, translating complex adult issues into terms a child could understand, creating a safe space for Matteo to process his feelings. "Would you like to go play on the swings?" George asked, desperate to connect, but unsure how. Matteo nodded enthusiastically. "Can you push me really high?" "If your mom says it's okay," George replied, looking to Selena for permission. She nodded. "Not too high, though. He thinks he's fearless, but he gets scared at the top." "I do not," Matteo protested, already running toward the swings. George followed, hyper-aware of Selena watching them from the bench. At the swings, Matteo scrambled onto the black rubber seat, gripping the chains expectantly. "Ready?" George asked, positioning himself behind the swing. "Super ready," Matteo declared. "Push me to the sky." George gave a gentle push, then another, gradually increasing the height as Matteo squealed with delight. The sound of his son's laughter was like nothing he'd ever heard, pure joy that made George's chest tight with emotion. "Higher," Matteo demanded. "Your mom said not too high," George reminded him, though he increased the force slightly with the next push. "Mom worries too much," Matteo declared with 7-year-old confidence. "I'm brave." "I can see that," George agreed, continuing to push. "What else are you good at besides being brave?" "I'm good at building things," Matteo said proudly. "And math. And I can do a cartwheel. And I'm learning to code on the computer at school." Pride swelled in George's chest. "Coding already? That's impressive. Mom says I get that from you," Matteo said, twisting to look back at George. "She says you build computer things too." "I do," George confirmed. "My company makes security software, programs that keep information safe on computers." Matteo considered this as he swung back and forth. "That sounds boring." George laughed, surprised by his son's candor. "It can be sometimes. What would you build if you could make any computer program you wanted?" "A game with dinosaurs that could fly spaceships," Matteo replied without hesitation. "With lasers." "That sounds much more exciting than what I build," George agreed, continuing to push the swing. They continued like this for 20 minutes, Mateo chattering about school, his friends, the model volcano he'd built for science class, while George listened hungrily, absorbing every detail. Eventually, Mateo tired of the swings and moved to the climbing structure, with George following attentively. From her bench, Selena watched their interaction with complex emotions. She had spent 7 years building walls around her heart, protecting both herself and Mateo from the pain George had caused. Seeing him now, carefully spotting Mateo as he climbed the rope ladder, his expression a mixture of terror and adoration as he watched his son, stirred feelings she'd thought long buried. After an hour at the playground, Mateo ran back to her, flushed with excitement. "Mom, Dad can do a handstand. And he said maybe he could show me how his company makes computer games." The word "dad" falling so easily from Mateo's lips sent a jolt through Selena. She met George's gaze over Mateo's head, seeing her own surprise mirrored there. "That sounds nice," she managed, smoothing Mateo's tousled hair. "But we should probably head home soon. You have homework to finish." "Can't Dad come too?" Mateo asked, the question piercing Selena's carefully constructed boundaries. "Not today," she replied gently. "But maybe another time." George approached, his expression careful. "I had a wonderful time, Mateo. Thank you for letting me play with you today. Will I see you again?" Mateo asked directly, looking up at George with those matching green eyes. George glanced at Selena before answering. "If your mom says it's okay, I'd like that very much." "Can he come to my soccer game on Tuesday?" Mateo asked, turning to Selena with pleading eyes. "Please, Mom. I'm going to play forward." Selena hesitated, torn between protective instinct and the naked hope on her son's face. "We'll see," she hedged. "Mr. Carter, your dad, is a very busy man." "I'll be there," George said firmly. "Just tell me when and where." As they parted ways in the parking lot, Mateo surprised George by throwing his arms around his waist in a quick hug before dashing to Selena's car. The simple gesture left George rooted to the spot, overwhelmed by an unfamiliar surge of emotion. Selena lingered a moment after settling Mateo in the back seat. "That went better than I expected," she admitted. "He's incredible, Selena," George said, his voice thick. "You've done an amazing job with him." "I had no choice," she replied, but without the earlier bitterness. "Thank you for today," George said, "for giving me a chance I don't deserve." Selena studied him, her expression softening slightly. "Don't make me regret it, George. He's already calling you Dad. Do you understand what that means? How quickly children attach. How deeply they can be hurt." "I do," George promised. "I won't let him down. Either of you." As Selena drove away with his son securely buckled in the back seat, George stood in the parking lot, a profound sense of purpose washing over him. For 7 years, he had pursued wealth and status with single-minded determination. Now, as he watched the car disappear around the corner, he understood with sudden clarity that nothing, not his company, not his fortune, not his carefully curated public image, mattered compared to earning his place in his son's life. Tuesday afternoon found George slipping out of a board meeting early, much to the surprise of his executive team. He changed in his private bathroom from his business suit into jeans and a casual shirt, then drove to the community soccer field where Mateo's team was scheduled to play. The bleachers were already filled with parents when he arrived. He spotted Selena easily, sitting midway up the aluminum stands, a blue team scarf around her neck despite the warmth of the day. "Is this seat taken?" he asked, gesturing to the space beside her. Selena looked up, surprise evident on her face. "You came. I promised I would," George replied simply, settling beside her. "The meeting with your Japanese investors?" she asked, remembering details of his work life that surprised him. "Delegated to my COO," George said. "This is more important." Selena gave him an appraising look, but said nothing more as the children's teams took the field for warm-ups. Mateo, in his blue jersey with the number 7, spotted them in the stands and waved enthusiastically. George waved back, an unfamiliar warmth spreading through his chest at his son's obvious delight in his presence. "He's been talking about you nonstop since Saturday," Selena confided as they watched the children running drills. "Asking questions I can't always answer." "Like what?" George asked. "Like whether you'll come live with us," Selena replied, her tone carefully neutral. "Like why you're married to someone who isn't his mother. Like whether you have other children." George winced. "What did you tell him?" The truth, in age-appropriate ways, Selena said. That you and I weren't together anymore when you married Vanessa. That these situations are complicated for grown-ups too. That he's your only child. The referee's whistle blew, signaling the start of the game, and their conversation paused as they focused on the field. Matteo played with enthusiastic, if unrefined skill, his determination evident in every movement. When he scored a goal in the second quarter, George found himself on his feet cheering alongside Selena. He's good, George observed as they sat back down. He loves it, Selena replied. Though his real passion is building things. He spends hours with his engineering sets, creating the most elaborate structures. Pride swelled in George's chest. Like father, like son, he murmured. Selena gave him a sidelong glance. He has your aptitude, yes, but not your ambition, thankfully. He builds for the joy of creating, not for recognition or success. The gentle rebuke stung, but George accepted it with a nod. Perhaps he's the better for it. They watched the remainder of the game in relative silence, cheering Matteo's successes and encouraging him through his mistakes. George observed how the other parents greeted Selena with easy familiarity. This was her community, built over 7 years of school events, sports games, and birthday parties. A community that had never included him. After the game ended in a narrow victory for Matteo's team, the boy ran to them, sweaty and beaming. Did you see my goal, Dad? Did you see how I kicked it right past the defender? I saw. George confirmed, his chest tight with emotion at being called Dad so naturally. You were incredible out there. We're going for ice cream to celebrate, Matteo announced. Mom always takes us after we win. You'll come too, right? George glanced at Selena, who gave a small nod of permission. I'd love to. At the ice cream parlor, George sat across from Selena in a booth, with Matteo beside him, chattering about the game between bites of chocolate ice cream. Several of Matteo's teammates and their parents occupied nearby tables, creating a bubble of excited conversation. And then when Jake passed me the ball, I saw an opening and just went for it, Matteo explained, gesturing with his spoon and nearly sending ice cream flying. Careful, Selena cautioned, handing him a napkin. Sorry, Matteo grinned, not looking particularly repentant. Dad, do you play soccer? Not since college, George admitted. I was more focused on computers than sports. Mom says you're super rich and have a big company, Matteo said with typical childish directness. Do you have a cool office? With video games and stuff? George laughed. Not many video games, I'm afraid. But I do have a nice view of the city. Can I see it sometime? Matteo asked eagerly. George looked to Selena, who hesitated before responding. Maybe someday, Mijo. Let's take things one step at a time. Matteo's attention was diverted by a teammate calling his name. Can I go talk to Tyler for a minute? He asked, already sliding out of the booth. Stay where I can see you, Selena instructed as Matteo darted to his friend's table. Alone with Selena, George found himself searching for the right words. Thank you for allowing me to be here today. Selena stirred her melting ice cream absently. Matteo wanted you here. That's what matters now. And you? George asked quietly. What do you want, Selena? She met his gaze directly. I want my son to be happy and secure. I want him protected from disappointment and abandonment. I want him to know he's loved unconditionally. Those are the things I want too, George said earnestly. Are they? Selena challenged. Because being a parent means putting those wants above everything else, above work, above personal comfort, above ambition. Can you do that, George? Truly. Before he could answer, Matteo returned, effectively ending their conversation. As they prepared to leave, Matteo turned to George with hopeful eyes. Can you come see my room? I want to show you my engineering set. George looked to Selena, who sighed in resignation. You can follow us home, if you'd like, she offered. For a little while. 20 minutes later, George found himself standing in the living room of Selena's modest but comfortable home. It was warm and inviting, with books lining the shelves and framed photos documenting Matteo's childhood, first steps, birthdays, school plays. 7 years of memories that George had missed, preserved in smiling images that made his chest ache with regret. Dad, come see, Matteo called, already racing down the hallway to his bedroom. George followed, acutely aware of Selena watching him, gauging his reactions. Matteo's room was exactly what a 7-year-old boy's space should be. Walls painted blue with solar system decals, shelves lined with books and small trophies. a desk with a beginner's computer, and a floor partially covered with an elaborate structure made from building blocks and engineering pieces. "This is my city," Matteo explained, dropping to his knees beside the construction. "It has a monorail and a space center and underwater tunnels." George knelt beside him, genuinely impressed by the complexity of the design. "This is remarkable, Matteo. You've thought of everything." "Not everything," Matteo admitted. "I can't figure out how to make the elevator work in the tall building. The string keeps getting tangled." "May I?" George asked, gesturing to the structure. For the next hour, father and son worked side by side, George guiding Matteo through potential solutions to the elevator problem. Selena watched from the doorway, her expression softening as she observed their interaction, George's patient explanations, Matteo's eager questions, the matching look of concentration they wore as they tested different mechanisms. When they finally created a working pulley system, Matteo's whoop of triumph brought a smile to both adults' faces. "We did it," Matteo exclaimed, watching the small platform rise smoothly up the side of his block skyscraper. "Dad, we're a good team." "Yes, we are," George agreed, his voice thick with emotion. Glancing at his watch, George realized with a start that it was nearly 8 o'clock, well past what he assumed was Matteo's bedtime. "I should probably go," he said reluctantly. "It's getting late." Disappointment crossed Matteo's face. "But we just fixed the elevator. And you need your sleep," Selena interjected gently. "School tomorrow, remember?" Matteo sighed dramatically. "Fine. But Dad, will you come back soon? I want to show you my volcano project for the science fair." "I'd love to see it," George replied, looking to Selena for guidance. "Why don't we say Saturday?" she suggested. "You could come for lunch." George nodded, warmth spreading through his chest at the invitation. Saturday would be perfect. As he prepared to leave, Matteo surprised him again with a fierce hug. "I'm glad you're my dad," the boy whispered, before racing off to brush his teeth. In the doorway, George turned to Selena. "I don't have the words to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," she replied. "Just don't hurt him, George. He's already so attached to you." "I won't," George promised. "Whatever else happens, whatever it takes, I won't disappoint him again." As he drove home to his empty penthouse, George realized that for the first time in years, he felt truly alive. The thrill of closing business deals, of watching his company's stock price rise, of being featured in financial magazines, none of it compared to the simple joy of helping his son solve a problem with his toy elevator. At home, he found Vanessa in the living room, scrolling through her tablet, a glass of wine in hand. She looked up as he entered, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rising at his casual attire. "Where have you been?" she asked, more curious than accusatory. "Marissa said you left the office at 3. George hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I was with my son, Matteo. He had a soccer game, and then invited me to see his home." Vanessa set down her tablet, giving him her full attention. "How was it?" "Incredible," George admitted, sinking onto the sofa across from her. "He's amazing, Vanessa. Smart, curious, kind. He builds these elaborate structures and asks the most insightful questions. And he has my eyes, exactly my eyes." Vanessa studied him thoughtfully. "I haven't seen you this animated in years." The observation struck George with its accuracy. When had he last felt this kind of genuine excitement? This sense of purpose? Certainly not in the boardroom, not in their social engagements, not even in their marriage. "It's changed everything," George said quietly. "Seeing him, knowing him." "And Selena?" Vanessa asked perceptively. How was seeing her again? George met his wife's gaze directly. "Complicated." Vanessa nodded, no anger in her expression. "Our marriage has always been more of a partnership than a love match, George. We both know that." The candid assessment surprised him, though he couldn't deny its truth. They had married because it made sense. She had needed financial security and social status. He had needed the perfect corporate wife to complete his billionaire image. It had been a transaction as much as a relationship. "What are you saying, Vanessa?" She sipped her wine before answering. "I'm saying that I've been offered a modeling campaign in Europe. 6 months, possibly longer. I was going to discuss it with you this weekend." "You want to take it?" George surmised. "I do," she confirmed. "And I think perhaps we both need space to figure out what we really want. What truly makes us happy." As George prepared for bed that night, his mind swirled with the day's events, Matteo's soccer game, the ice cream celebration, the hours spent building together, And finally, the unexpected conversation with Vanessa. His life, so carefully structured and controlled for years, was suddenly in flux, shifting in ways he couldn't have predicted. Yet as he drifted toward sleep, the image that stayed with him wasn't the uncertain future of his marriage or the potential complications of co-parenting with Selena. It was Matteo's face, lit with triumph as their elevator mechanism finally worked, and the words that had followed. "Dad, we're a good team." For the first time in 7 years, George Carter fell asleep with a smile on his face, his priorities rearranged by the simple, profound joy of being called Dad by the son he never knew he had. If this story is touching your heart and reminding you of what truly matters in life, subscribe to Lux Love Chronicles with Mr. Wentworth for more powerful stories that might just change how you see the world. In the weeks that followed, George's life transformed in ways both subtle and profound. Outwardly, he maintained his role as the brilliant, driven CEO of Carter Technologies. But internally, his priorities had shifted completely. Board meetings and investment decisions that once consumed his every waking thought now felt like distractions from what really mattered: building a relationship with Matteo. He restructured his schedule ruthlessly, delegating responsibilities he'd once insisted on handling personally. His executive team watched in bewilderment as their workaholic boss began leaving the office at reasonable hours and declining non-essential business trips. "You're turning down the Tokyo conference?" his assistant Marissa asked incredulously one morning. "But that's the biggest tech security summit in Asia. You've never missed it." "Family commitment," George replied simply, placing a framed photo of Matteo on his desk, a snapshot from the boys' soccer game, his grin wide beneath the shock of dark hair. Marissa stared at the photo, then at George. "Since when do you have?" "It's a long story," George said with a smile. 7 years long, actually. Saturday lunches at Selena's home became a regular fixture in his calendar. Sometimes they extended into afternoons of playing soccer in the backyard, helping with homework, or building increasingly elaborate structures with Matteo's engineering sets. Each visit revealed new facets of his son's personality: his quick wit, his determination when faced with challenges, his compassion for others. One rainy Saturday, as Matteo focused on a school project at the kitchen table, George helped Selena with the dishes, their movement around the small kitchen falling into a surprisingly comfortable rhythm. "He got an A on his science presentation," Selena mentioned, handing George a plate to dry. "The volcano you helped him rebuild after the first one collapsed." Pride warmed George's chest. "He did all the real work. I just helped with the structural engineering." Selena smiled. "Don't sell yourself short." He was so proud to tell his teacher that his dad helped him. The casual use of his dad sent a jolt of pleasure through George. After 3 weeks of regular visits, it still amazed him how naturally Matteo had accepted him into his life. "I'm taking him to the Science Museum next weekend," George said, placing the dried plate in the cabinet. "If that's okay with you, of course." Selena paused, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. "Just the two of you. I thought it might be good for us to have some one-on-one time," George explained. "But you're welcome to join us." Selena shook her head. "No, I think it's a good idea. You should have time with just you." She hesitated before adding, "How's Vanessa handling all this?" George set down the dish towel. "She left for Europe last week. A 6-month modeling contract in Milan." "I see," Selena said carefully. "And your marriage?" "On pause, I suppose you could say," George admitted. "We've agreed to reevaluate when she returns. But honestly, I think we both know where things are heading." Selena absorbed this information without comment, turning back to the sink. George watched her profile, struck by how familiar she still was to him after all these years. The determined set of her jaw when she was thinking, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when nervous, gestures that transported him back to their college days, when everything had seemed simpler. "Selena," he began hesitantly, "I know I have no right to ask, but have you ever thought about—" "Dad," Matteo's voice interrupted from the kitchen table. "Can you help me with this math problem? It's tricky." The moment broken, George moved to assist his son, the unfinished question hanging in the air between him and Selena. The Science Museum outing the following weekend marked a milestone in George and Matteo's developing relationship. Without Selena present as a buffer, George felt both exhilarated and terrified, solely responsible for his son's safety and happiness for the first time. They explored interactive exhibits on electricity, built structures in the engineering lab, and marveled at dinosaur fossils. Mateo's endless questions and boundless enthusiasm were exhausting and wonderful. By mid-afternoon, as they shared ice cream in the museum cafe, George felt as though he'd always been a father, as though the past 7 years of absence had been a strange dream. "Dad," Mateo said suddenly, looking up from his chocolate cone, "why don't you live with me and Mom?" The question caught George off guard. "Well," he began carefully, "your mom and I aren't married. We don't live together because we're not a couple anymore." Mateo considered this. "But you like each other, right? You laugh at her jokes, and she smiles when you're not looking." The observation, so perceptive from a 7-year-old, stunned George. "It's complicated, buddy. Sometimes grown-ups have history that makes things difficult." "What's history?" Mateo asked, ice cream forgotten. "Things that happened in the past," George explained. "Your mom and I were together a long time ago, before you were born. But I made some mistakes, and we went separate ways." "Because you were scared of being a dad?" Mateo asked bluntly, repeating what he'd been told. George winced. "Yes, I was scared, and I was very focused on my work. I thought success meant making lots of money and having a big company. I was wrong." "What does success mean?" Mateo asked, licking his ice cream cone. George considered the question seriously. "I think real success is being there for the people you love, building relationships that matter, finding joy in simple moments." He smiled at his son. "Like eating ice cream with you." Mateo nodded as though this made perfect sense. "So you were wrong before, but now you know better?" "Exactly," George agreed, amazed by his son's capacity to distill complex adult failings into such simple terms. "Then why can't you and Mom try again?" Mateo persisted. "If you know better now?" "It's not that simple," George began, but Mateo had already moved on, distracted by the prospect of visiting the planetarium next. The conversation lingered in George's mind long after he'd returned Mateo to Selena's home. The boy's innocent questions had crystallized feelings George had been avoiding confronting, the growing realization that his feelings for Selena had never truly died, merely been buried beneath ambition and regret. As the weeks passed, George found himself increasingly drawn not just to Mateo, but to the life Selena had built. Their modest home, filled with books and art projects and the controlled chaos of raising a child, felt more like a home than his sterile penthouse ever had. The community she'd created, neighbors who waved from their porches, Mateo's friends and their parents, her colleagues from the community center where she worked, was warm and genuine in ways his business circles had never been. For weeks into their new routine, disaster struck. A major security breach at one of Carter Technology's biggest clients demanded George's immediate attention, forcing him to miss Mateo's school play. He called Selena with the news, his stomach churning with dread. "I'm so sorry," he said, pacing his office as his executive team waited for his direction. "The situation is critical, millions of dollars and sensitive data at risk. I can't delegate this." "I understand," Selena replied, her voice carefully neutral. "I'll explain to Mateo." "Let me talk to him, please," George requested. There was a pause, then Mateo's excited voice came through the phone. "Dad, are you on your way? I'm the narrator. I have the most lines of anyone." George closed his eyes, pain lancing through his chest. "Mateo, buddy, I'm so sorry. There's an emergency at work. I can't make it to your play tonight." The silence that followed was worse than any tantrum could have been. "Mateo," George prompted. "It's okay," the boy finally said, his voice small. "Mom will record it for you. I'll make it up to you," George promised desperately. "We'll do something special this weekend, anything you want." "Sure," Mateo replied, without his usual enthusiasm. "I gotta go, Dad. We're starting soon." After disconnecting the call, George stood motionless in his office, the security crisis suddenly feeling hollow compared to the disappointment in his son's voice. For a moment, he considered abandoning the situation, delegating it despite the risks, and racing to the elementary school. Instead, he turned to his waiting team and did what he had always done, compartmentalized his emotions and focused on the crisis at hand. Hours later, as they finally contained the security breach, George checked his watch. 9:30 p.m. The play would be long over. The security breach had been contained, but George knew he'd failed a much more important test. He drove to Selena's house the following morning, hoping to speak with Matteo before school. A small gift bag containing a model rocket kit sat on the passenger seat, a peace offering that felt woefully inadequate. Selena opened the door in her work clothes, surprise evident on her face. "George, it's 7:30 in the morning. I know it's early. I wanted to see Matteo before school, to apologize properly." George ran a hand through his disheveled hair, having come straight from an all-night crisis session at the office. Selena's expression softened slightly. "He was very disappointed last night." "I know. I'm so sorry. It's not me you need to apologize to," she replied, stepping aside to let him enter. "He's eating breakfast." George found Matteo at the kitchen table, pushing cereal around his bowl without much enthusiasm. The boy looked up as George entered, his expression guarded in a way that broke George's heart. "Hey, buddy," George said softly, taking the seat across from him. "Hi," Matteo replied flatly, returning his attention to his cereal. "I missed your play last night," George began, "and I'm really, really sorry. There was an emergency at work that I couldn't ignore." Matteo shrugged. "It's okay. Mom recorded it on her phone. I'd love to watch it," George said, "but I know it's not the same as being there." "Jake's dad was there," Matteo said, still not meeting George's eyes. "And Tyler's dad, and even Max's dad, who lives in another state, flew in to see it." Each comparison was a knife to George's heart. "I should have been there too. You said you would be." Matteo finally looked up, his green eyes, George's eyes, bright with hurt. "You promised." "I know I did," George acknowledged. "And I broke that promise. I made a mistake." Matteo considered this. "Mom says everyone makes mistakes. But she also says what matters is what you do after." The wisdom in this statement, clearly repeated from Selena's teachings, caught George off guard. "Your mom is very smart. And she's right. That's why I'm here now, to tell you how sorry I am, and to ask what I can do to make it up to you." He placed the gift bag on the table. "I brought you something. It's not because I think a present fixes anything. It's because I thought we might build it together." Matteo eyed the bag with interest despite himself. He peeked inside, then looked up with reluctant excitement. A Saturn V rocket. "The most complicated model they make for your age group," George confirmed. "I thought it might be a challenge for us. Can we start it today after school?" Matteo asked, the hurt in his eyes receding slightly. "If your mom says it's okay, I'll be here waiting when you get home." Selena, who had been watching their interaction from the doorway, nodded her permission. "But now you need to finish getting ready for school, Mijo. The bus will be here in 10 minutes. As Matteo rushed off to brush his teeth, Selena joined George at the table. "You look terrible," she observed. "I feel terrible," George admitted. "I was up all night dealing with the security breach, but that's no excuse. I should have found a way to be at his play." "Yes, you should have," Selena agreed without heat. "But what matters now is consistency moving forward. He's forgiven you this time." Children are remarkably resilient, but they also learn from patterns, not promises. George nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke. "I'm learning. Slower than I should, perhaps, but I am learning." "I know you are," Selena said, surprising him with her understanding. "It's why I'm still allowing this relationship to develop. I can see how much you care about him." "I love him," George said simply. "More than I thought possible in such a short time." Something shifted in Selena's expression. "He's easy to love. He always has been." Before George could respond, Matteo returned with his backpack. "I'm ready." After seeing Matteo off to the school bus, George turned to Selena. "May I come back after work to help with the rocket?" "He'd like that," Selena replied. "But George, if you say you'll be here." "I will be," he promised. "I've already rearranged my schedule and delegated the security breach follow-up. Nothing will keep me away this time." That evening, George arrived precisely at 5 o'clock, having left work early despite the ongoing crisis. For the next 2 hours, he and Matteo sat at the kitchen table, carefully assembling the intricate rocket model. Selena moved around them, preparing dinner and occasionally offering advice or encouragement. "This is the command module," George explained, showing Matteo how to attach the small piece. "This is where the astronauts sat during the journey to the moon." "Were they scared?" Matteo asked, carefully applying glue where George indicated. "I'm sure they were," George replied. "But they were also brave and prepared. They had trained for years for that mission." "Like how I practiced for weeks for my play," Matteo observed. George winced at the comparison. "Yes, exactly like that. And I'm very sorry I missed seeing all your hard work. Mateo nodded, accepting the apology. Mom showed me the video. I was really good. I bet you were the best narrator they've ever had, George said sincerely. I was, Mateo agreed with the easy confidence of childhood. Even Ms. Peterson said so, and she's been teaching forever. She's at least 40. George laughed, relief washing through him at the return of Mateo's usual enthusiasm. As they continued working on the model, George found himself hyper-aware of Selena moving around the kitchen, of the domestic tranquility of the scene. It felt right in a way his life hadn't for years, perhaps had never felt, even before Mateo. Over dinner, Mateo chatted about school and friends, his disappointment apparently forgotten. After helping with the dishes, George reluctantly prepared to leave. Can't you stay longer? Mateo asked, trailing him to the door. We could watch a movie. Mom got Space Explorers from the library. It has real footage from NASA. George glanced at Selena, who shrugged, leaving the decision to him. I'd love to, buddy, but it's already past your bedtime on a school night. How about we save the movie for this weekend? Mateo sighed dramatically, but accepted the compromise. Okay, but you'll definitely come on Saturday, right? For the whole day? Definitely, George promised, kneeling to give Mateo a hug goodbye. The boy threw his arms around George's neck with complete trust, an embrace that filled George with both joy and terror. Joy at the connection they'd formed, terror at the responsibility of never betraying that trust again. After Mateo went to brush his teeth, George lingered in the doorway with Selena. Thank you for giving me another chance today. You're doing well with him, Selena acknowledged. Even with the misstep, he's happy to have you in his life. And you? George asked, the question slipping out before he could reconsider. How do you feel about having me back in your life? Selena's expression became guarded. It's complicated, George. We have a long history, not all of it good. I know, he acknowledged. But being here, with both of you, it feels right in a way nothing has in a very long time. Selena looked away. We've been managing just fine for 7 years. I know you have, George said gently. You've created something remarkable here, a home, a community, a life full of love for Mateo. I'm not suggesting you need me. I'm just saying that I need this, need both of you, more than I ever realized. Before Selena could respond, Mateo called from the bathroom, needing help with something. The moment broken, George said his goodbyes and headed home to his empty penthouse, thoughts swirling with what-ifs and possibilities. The following weeks fell into a pattern that began to feel like a new normal. George visited several evenings a week after work and spent most of Saturday with Mateo. Sometimes Selena joined their activities. Other times she used the opportunity to meet friends or simply enjoy some quiet time alone. Sundays were reserved for Selena and Mateo's traditional mother-son time, a boundary George respected without question. His relationship with Mateo deepened with each interaction. The boy's initial excitement about having a father had evolved into something more profound, a genuine bond built on shared interests, honest communication, and reliable presence. George discovered parenting challenges he'd never anticipated, helping with frustrating homework, navigating friendship dramas, addressing fears that seemed irrational to adults but were very real to a 7-year-old. One evening, as they worked on a particularly challenging math worksheet at the kitchen table, Mateo threw down his pencil in frustration. I can't do it. It's too hard. George, who had been patiently explaining the same concept for 20 minutes, fought his own frustration. Yes, you can. You're just overthinking it. No, I'm stupid, Mateo declared, tears welling in his eyes. Everyone else in class gets it. Even Tommy, and he can't even tie his shoes right. Hey, George said gently, moving his chair closer to Mateo's. You are not stupid. Not even close. Your brain just works differently than some of your classmates. That's not bad or good. It's just different. Different is bad, Mateo mumbled, wiping his nose with his sleeve. Different is extraordinary, George countered. Look at Albert Einstein. His teachers thought he was slow because his mind worked differently. But he ended up changing how we understand the entire universe. Mateo looked up skeptically. Really, George confirmed. And you know what? I struggled with these same types of problems when I was your age. You did. Disbelief colored Mateo's voice. But you're super smart. You make computers and stuff. I am now, George agreed. But it took practice and time. Our brains are like muscles. They get stronger when we challenge them. Mateo considered this, then picked up his pencil with renewed determination. Let's try again. Watching his son work through the problem, his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration, George felt a surge of emotion unlike anything he'd experienced in the boardroom or with any business success. This, he realized, was what mattered, these small moments of connection and growth. From the living room doorway, Selena watched them without announcing her presence, her heart constricting at the tableau before her. George's patience, his gentle encouragement, his obvious devotion to their son, it was everything she'd once hoped for, arriving 7 years too late. Or was it? The thought startled her. For 7 years, she had built walls around her heart, focusing all her energy on raising Mateo and building a stable life for them both. Dating had been sporadic and ultimately unfulfilling. No man had ever measured up to the memory of what she and George had shared before ambition consumed him. And now here he was, transformed by fatherhood, showing glimpses of the man she had once loved so deeply. The realization was terrifying. Letting George into Mateo's life had been risk enough. Letting him back into her own heart would be foolishness of the highest order, wouldn't it? If you've ever faced the painful choice between protecting yourself from past hurt and opening your heart to new possibilities, hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Some of life's most profound decisions come when we're balanced between fear and hope. As spring turned to early summer, George found himself more integrated into Mateo and Selena's life than he had dared hope. He attended parent-teacher conferences, cheered at soccer games, helped with home repairs, and even joined their monthly movie nights with neighbors. To those around them, they might have appeared to be a typical family, except that George returned to his penthouse each night, maintaining the careful boundaries Selena had established. His professional life had adapted to accommodate his new priorities. The Tokyo office was thriving under his COO's leadership. Board meetings were scheduled around Mateo's activities rather than the other way around. His executive team had adjusted to their CEO's transformation, some with confusion, others with newfound respect for his work-life balance. One warm June evening, as George helped Selena carry dishes to the kitchen after dinner, her phone rang. She answered, her expression shifting to concern as she listened to the caller. "What is it?" George asked when she disconnected. "My mother," Selena explained. "She fell and might have broken her wrist. My sister's with her at the emergency room, but Mom's asking for me." "Go," George said immediately. "I'll stay with Mateo." Selena hesitated. "You've never stayed with him alone overnight." "There's a first time for everything," George replied. "We'll be fine. You focus on your mother." The trust implicit in Selena's nod wasn't lost on George. His bedtime routine is in his planner. Bath, teeth, 2 books, lights out by 8:30, George recited. "I've been paying attention, Selena." A small smile touched her lips. "Yes, you have." She kissed Mateo goodbye, promising to call in the morning, and left with a final grateful glance at George. Bedtime went smoothly until the lights went out. As George prepared to leave Mateo's room, the boy's voice stopped him. "Dad, can you stay until I fall asleep?" George settled back into the chair beside the bed. "Of course. Mom always stays," Mateo explained, his voice small in the darkness. "Sometimes I have bad dreams." "What kind of bad dreams?" George asked gently. There was a long pause before Mateo answered. "Sometimes I dream that people go away and don't come back." The simple statement pierced George's heart. "Is that why you wanted me to stay tonight? Because Mom went to help Grandma?" "No," Mateo said after a moment. "It's because I used to dream about you." "About me?" George's throat tightened. "Before I met you," Mateo clarified. "I used to dream I had a dad, but I couldn't see his face. And then I would wake up and remember I didn't have one." Another pause. "Except now I do." George moved from the chair to sit on the edge of the bed, placing his hand gently on Mateo's shoulder. "Now you do," he confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. "And I'm not going anywhere, buddy. I promise." "Even if you and Mom don't live together?" Mateo asked sleepily. "Even then," George assured him. "No matter what, I will always be your dad. Nothing can change that." Mateo's breathing soon deepened into sleep, but George remained beside him, watching his son's peaceful face in the dim glow of the night light. 7 years ago, he had walked away from the greatest responsibility and the greatest joy of his life. Sitting here now, he silently renewed his promise never to make that mistake again, regardless of how his relationship with Selena evolved. The next morning, George managed pancakes for breakfast, slightly burned but enthusiastically received, located missing homework, and got Matteo to the bus stop on time. Returning to the quiet house, he found himself examining the photos on the walls more carefully, the visual history of Matteo's life without him. First steps, first birthday, first day of kindergarten, holidays, and vacations, all captured in images that now felt like both a gift and an indictment. One photo in particular caught his attention, Matteo as a toddler, maybe 2 years old, sitting on Santa's lap at what appeared to be a community center Christmas event. The child was beaming with delight, his green eyes, George's eyes, bright with excitement. But it was Selena standing beside them that held George's attention. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, which held a sadness that made his chest ache. This was a woman doing her best to create happy memories for her son while carrying her own private pain. George was still lost in thought when Selena returned mid-morning. "How's your mother?" he asked immediately. "Hairline fracture, but she'll be fine," Selena replied, setting down her purse. "My sister's staying with her for a few days." She glanced around the tidy kitchen. "Everything okay here?" "Perfect," George assured her. Matteo got to school on time, with his homework and lunch. Selena smiled. "I had no doubt." An awkward silence fell between them, unusual after weeks of comfortable co-parenting. George realized he should leave, go to the office, resume the normal rhythm of their carefully structured arrangement, but found himself reluctant to break the moment. "I was looking at the photos," he said instead, gesturing to the wall, "trying to piece together the years I missed." Selena's expression softened. "There's a photo album in the living room bookshelf. The blue one. It has more, if you want to see." The invitation felt significant. George retrieved the album and sat on the couch, Selena joining him after a moment's hesitation. Together they turned the pages, Selena narrating the moments captured, Matteo's first steps at 11 months. So early the pediatrician was shocked. His obsession with dinosaurs at age 3, the chicken pox that kept him home for 2 weeks in kindergarten. He was colicky as a baby, Selena recalled, pointing to a photo of a red-faced infant. Wouldn't sleep more than 2 hours at a stretch for the first 4 months. My mother stayed with us for a while, but she had to go back to work eventually. Those nights alone with him crying were. She shook her head. Some of the hardest of my life. Guilt washed over George. I should have been there. Yes, you should have, Selena agreed without rancor. But you're here now. She turned another page, revealing Matteo's 3rd birthday party. He asked about you that day. It was the first time he really understood that other kids had dads, and he didn't. George swallowed hard. What did you tell him? The truth, in terms he could understand. That his daddy wasn't ready to be a father when he was born. Selena met George's gaze directly. I never told him you didn't want him, because I wasn't sure that was true. I didn't know if you ever really understood what you were walking away from. I didn't, George admitted. Not really. I thought I was making a rational decision, focusing on building financial security instead of rushing into parenthood. I told myself I was being responsible. He laughed bitterly. God, I was so young and stupid. So focused on the wrong kind of success. We both were young, Selena said quietly. I was just as ambitious as you, remember? Law school, plans for a corporate career. She gestured around the modest living room. This wasn't the life I'd imagined either. Do you regret it? George asked, realizing he'd never considered how dramatically her dreams had changed too. Not for a second, Selena replied without hesitation. Matteo brought purpose and joy I never could have anticipated. I finished my degree, just on a different timeline. I found work I love at the community center. She smiled ruefully. Though I won't pretend it wasn't hard, especially in the beginning. You're remarkable, George said sincerely. The life you've built for him, for both of you, it's beautiful. It's enough, Selena agreed. It's been enough for a long time. The unspoken question hung between them. Could it be more? Before George could find the courage to voice this thought, his phone rang, an emergency at the office requiring his immediate attention. As he reluctantly prepared to leave, he paused at the door. Selena, would you have dinner with me on Friday? Just us. Matteo could stay with your sister. Surprise flickered across her face. Like a date. Like two people who share a child and a history, trying to figure out if we might also share a future, George replied carefully. Selena studied him for a long moment. I'll ask my sister about watching Matteo. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. George left with cautious hope blooming in his chest. Friday evening found George more nervous than he'd been before multi-billion-dollar negotiations. He'd chosen a small, intimate restaurant, not the flashy establishments he frequented with business associates or the trendy spots he'd taken Vanessa to be photographed by society pages. This was a place for conversation, for reconnection. Selena arrived wearing a simple blue dress that brought out the warmth in her eyes. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and she wore minimal makeup, so different from Vanessa's carefully cultivated glamour, yet infinitely more beautiful to George's eyes. "You look stunning," he said sincerely as she sat across from him. "Thank you." Her smile was reserved, but genuine. "This is a lovely restaurant. I thought you'd like it," George replied. "Quiet enough to talk, but not pretentious. Unlike your usual haunts." Selena teased gently. George laughed. "I've been seen in some regrettably pretentious establishments over the years." "I know," Selena said, surprising him. "I've seen the photos in business magazines. George Carter, tech wunderkind, at all the right events with all the right people." Heat rose in George's face. That was part of building the image, the brand. It felt necessary at the time. "And now?" Selena asked, studying him over her menu. "Now it feels hollow," George admitted. "Empty achievements compared to watching Matteo master a difficult math problem or score a goal in soccer." Over appetizers, they discussed Matteo, his progress in school, his budding interest in coding, his upcoming summer camp plans. Safe territory that kept the conversation flowing easily. As their main courses arrived, George steered them toward more personal ground. "Vanessa called from Milan yesterday," he said. "She's met someone. A photographer she's working with on her campaign." Selena set down her fork. "I'm sorry, George." He shook his head. "Don't be. Our marriage was always more of a business arrangement than a love match. We both knew that, even if neither of us said it aloud." "Still," Selena said, "it must be difficult." "Less than you might think," George replied honestly. "She and I will always care for each other, but we were never in love. Not the way." He hesitated, then finished quietly. "Not the way you and I were." Selena's eyes flickered away from his. "That was a long time ago." 7 years, George acknowledged. "A lifetime in some ways. Certainly long enough for people to change." "Yes," Selena agreed, meeting his gaze again. "You've changed. I've seen it these past months with Matteo. The way you listen to him, prioritize him. The man I knew 7 years ago wouldn't have recognized himself." "Fatherhood has changed me," George admitted. "But so has seeing what I almost lost forever. What I did lose for 7 years." Their conversation turned to memories, their college days, the early years of their relationship, the dreams they'd shared before life had taken them in different directions. By dessert, they were laughing over shared recollections, the tension between them softening with each story. "Do you remember that road trip to the coast?" Selena asked, smiling at the memory. "When your car broke down and we had to spend the night in that weird motel with the peacock theme?" "The Peacock Paradise," George recalled, laughing. "With peacock wallpaper, peacock bedspreads, even peacock soap in the bathroom. And you were so determined to salvage the romantic weekend that you bribed the night manager to find us a bottle of wine." Selena continued, her eyes bright with amusement. "Which turned out to be the worst wine ever bottled," George finished. "But we drank it anyway. And it was still perfect," Selena said softly, the laughter fading from her voice, replaced by something deeper, more wistful. George reached across the table, tentatively taking her hand. "We were good together once, Selena, before I lost sight of what mattered." She didn't pull away, but her expression grew serious. "George, we can't go back. Too much has happened." "I'm not asking to go back," he clarified. "I'm wondering if we could go forward. Together. As a family." Selena withdrew her hand gently. "It's not that simple. We're co-parenting well now, finding our rhythm. Matteo is happy. Introducing romance could complicate everything. Or it could give him what he's already asked for several times, his parents together," George countered. "And if it doesn't work out?" Selena challenged. "If we try and fail, how would that affect him?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. George had no easy answer. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I can't predict the future. All I know is that being with you and Matteo these past months has brought me more joy than the previous 7 years combined. And I hope, You might feel something similar. Selena was quiet for a long moment. I need time, George. This isn't just about us. It's about Matteo, about the stable life I've worked so hard to build for him. I understand, George said, though disappointment settled in his chest. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. As he drove her home, the conversation shifted back to safer topics: Matteo's upcoming science camp, a community fundraiser Selena was organizing, a new coding program George wanted to introduce Matteo to. At her door, he hesitated, unsure of the appropriate goodbye after such an emotionally charged evening. Selena solved the dilemma by leaning up and pressing a soft kiss to his cheek. "Thank you for dinner," she said quietly, "and for being patient." The simple gesture filled George with cautious hope. "Thank you for giving me a chance, with Matteo, and maybe with us." The days that followed settled back into their established routine, though something had shifted subtly between George and Selena. Small touches lingered longer. Shared glances carried unspoken meanings. They moved around each other in the kitchen with a comfortable awareness that hadn't been there before. Matteo, perceptive as always, noticed the change. "Are you and Mom dating?" he asked George directly one Saturday as they worked on building a treehouse in the backyard. George nearly dropped his hammer. "What makes you ask that?" "You look at her the way Jake's dad looks at Jake's mom," Matteo observed. "And she smiles more when you're here." "Your mom and I care about each other," George replied carefully. "We always have. But adult relationships can be complicated." "Because you hurt her feelings before?" Matteo asked bluntly. George winced. "Yes. I made mistakes that were hard to forgive." Matteo considered this as he sorted nails into piles. "Mom says forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means choosing to move forward anyway." "Your mom is very wise," George said, amazed once again by the insights Selena had imparted to their son. "So if she forgives you, does that mean you'll live with us?" Matteo persisted, his question revealing the hope he still harbored. "I don't know, buddy," George answered honestly. "That would be up to your mom. But no matter what happens between us, I'll always be your dad, and we'll always be a family, even if we don't all live in the same house." Matteo nodded, accepting this answer with the resilience of childhood. "I hope she forgives you," he said simply, before returning his attention to the treehouse plans. That evening, after Matteo was in bed, George shared the conversation with Selena as they sat on the back porch, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk. "He's hoping we'll get back together," George concluded, though I tried to manage his expectations. Selena sighed, cradling her tea mug between her palms. "He's been dropping hints to me too, talking about his friends whose parents are married, asking why we live in such a small house when you have a big one." "What do you tell him?" George asked curiously. "The truth. That grown-up relationships are complicated. That you and I are figuring things out. That his home is perfect just as it is because it's filled with love." She smiled ruefully. "Though he informed me yesterday that his room would be way more awesome if it was twice as big." George laughed. "I've created a monster by showing him my penthouse." "Yes, you have," Selena agreed, but her tone was teasing rather than accusatory. They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, the evening air warm around them. "I've been thinking," Selena said finally, her voice careful. "About us. About what you said at dinner last week." George's heart rate quickened, but he remained silent, giving her space to continue. "7 years ago, I was heartbroken when you chose your company over our family," Selena said. "But looking back, I understand better now. We were young. The pregnancy wasn't planned. Your company was at a critical stage." She met his gaze directly. "I'm not excusing what you did, but I can see how it happened." "Thank you for that," George said quietly, though understanding doesn't make it right. "No, it doesn't," Selena agreed. "But these past months, watching you with Matteo, seeing how completely you've rearranged your life to be present for him, it's shown me who you really are, who you've become." Hope bloomed in George's chest. "And who is that?" "The man I always believed you could be," Selena said simply. "Someone who understands that real wealth isn't measured in dollars or stock options. Someone who keeps his promises, even when they're inconvenient. Someone who loves our son as completely as I do." George reached for her hand, his heart pounding. "Selena, I'm not saying yes to anything yet," she interrupted gently. "But I am saying I'm open to the possibility. Of us. Of seeing where this might lead." It wasn't a declaration of love, But to George, it felt more precious than any business victory he'd ever achieved. "That's all I'm asking for," he said, squeezing her hand. "A chance. If you've ever had to decide whether to give someone a second chance, you know it's one of life's most difficult choices. Comment below if you believe true change is possible, or if you think people's core nature remains the same." Summer brought new rhythms to their evolving family life. Mateo divided his time between science camp, soccer practice, and long days of creative play. George adjusted his work schedule to be present for as many activities as possible, discovering the unique pleasures of childhood summer through his son's experiences, the sticky sweetness of popsicles on hot afternoons, the proud exhaustion after swimming lessons, the wonder of catching fireflies in the backyard at dusk. His relationship with Selena progressed with careful deliberation. They began with coffee dates while Mateo was at camp, then dinner at restaurants where they wouldn't be recognized, and eventually, quiet evenings on Selena's back porch after Mateo was asleep. They moved slowly, rediscovering each other as the people they had become rather than rushing back to what they had once been. One evening in late July, as they walked through the neighborhood after dinner, George broached a subject he'd been considering for weeks. "I've been looking at houses," he said casually. "In this area?" Selena glanced at him with surprise. "You're selling the penthouse?" "I am," George confirmed. It never really felt like home. Just a place to sleep between workdays. "What kind of house are you looking for?" Selena asked carefully. "Something with a yard. Room for Mateo to play. Maybe space for a home office so I can work remotely more often." He hesitated before adding, "And room to grow, perhaps." Eventually, Selena's pace slowed as she absorbed the implications of his words. "That sounds like you're planning to stay in our lives for the long term." "I am," George said simply. "If you'll have me." They walked in silence for a moment, the evening air heavy with possibility. "There's a house for sale on Maple Street," Selena said finally. 4 bedrooms, big backyard with mature trees. Good for a treehouse. "Would you like to see it with me?" George asked, his heart rate quickening. "Just to look." Selena considered this, then nodded. Just to look. The house on Maple Street was everything George had imagined, spacious without being ostentatious, with character and charm that his sterile penthouse had always lacked. As the realtor showed them through the rooms, George found himself watching Selena's reactions more than the house itself. The way her eyes lingered on the kitchen with its sunny breakfast nook, how she ran her hand along the built-in bookshelves in the living room, her smile as she looked out at the massive oak tree perfect for the treehouse he'd promised Mateo. "What do you think?" he asked when the realtor stepped outside to take a call. "It's beautiful," Selena admitted. "Much nicer than what I could afford on my own." "I wasn't suggesting," George began, then stopped himself. "Actually, maybe I was. Suggesting something, I mean. Not today, not right away, but someday. The possibility of sharing a home. The 3 of us." Selena turned to face him fully, her expression serious. "George, are you talking about moving in together? Or something more?" "Both," he admitted. "Eventually. If that's what we both want." "This is a huge step," Selena said, though he noticed she didn't reject the idea outright. "We've only been, whatever we are, for a couple of months." "I know," George agreed. "And I'm not pushing for immediate decisions. I just want you to know where my heart is, where I hope we're heading." Before Selena could respond, the realtor returned, ending their private conversation. But later, as they walked back to Selena's home in the gathering twilight, she slipped her hand into his, a small gesture that filled George with profound hope. That weekend, George took Mateo fishing at a nearby lake, an activity he'd never experienced himself but had researched extensively to provide his son with the quintessential father-son outing. Their success with actual fish was limited, but the day was filled with conversation, laughter, and the quiet contentment of shared experience. As they sat on the dock, waiting for fish that seemed determined to ignore their bait, Mateo asked suddenly, "Dad, are you going to marry Mom?" George nearly dropped his fishing rod. "What makes you ask that?" Mateo shrugged. "You look at her like you love her, and you're buying a house in our neighborhood. And yesterday I heard you talking about building a tree house in a big oak tree, but our yard doesn't have an oak tree." George marveled at his son's perceptiveness. "You're pretty observant, buddy. Mom says I notice things other people miss," Mateo said proudly. "So are you? Going to marry her?" George considered how to answer honestly without creating expectations he couldn't guarantee would be fulfilled. "I love your mom," he said finally. I think I always have, even when I made the mistake of walking away. But marriage is a decision two people have to make together. Your mom might not be ready for that. Because you hurt her feelings before, Mateo said, nodding sagely. Exactly, George confirmed. Trust takes time to rebuild. But you want to marry her, Mateo pressed. George smiled at his son's persistence. Yes, Mateo? If your mom will have me, someday I would very much like to marry her and for us to be a family all together. Mateo beamed. I knew it. Can I be the best man? Jake's brother was the best man at his dad's wedding, and he got to carry the rings on a special pillow. If it happens, George cautioned, you would definitely be the best man. But buddy, this is just between us for now, okay? Don't say anything to your mom about this conversation. It's a man-to-man secret, Mateo agreed solemnly, before his attention was diverted by a tug on his fishing line. August brought a heat wave and an unexpected complication. Vanessa returned from Milan, arriving at George's penthouse unannounced one evening. I thought you were staying in Europe until December, George said, surprised to find his estranged wife at his door. The campaign wrapped early, Vanessa replied, sweeping past him into the living room. She looked as glamorous as ever, though there was a new softness to her expression that George hadn't seen before. And I wanted to talk to you in person. About the divorce, George surmised, following her. Among other things, Vanessa agreed, settling onto the sofa. I've met someone, as you know. Paolo. He's asked me to marry him. That's fast, George observed, taking the chair opposite her. Vanessa smiled. Says the man who's apparently playing happy families with his ex and secret son after just a few months. George stiffened. How do you know about that? George, please. Vanessa rolled her eyes. You're a public figure. People notice when a tech billionaire starts showing up at children's soccer games and elementary school functions. The gossip columns are already speculating. Cold dread washed over George. There have been articles. About Mateo? Nothing explicit yet, Vanessa assured him. But it's only a matter of time. That's partly why I came back, to warn you, and to finalize our situation cleanly before the vultures start circling. George ran a hand through his hair, mind racing with implications. Selena and Mateo have no experience with media scrutiny. This could be devastating for them. Which is why you need to get ahead of it, Vanessa advised pragmatically. Control the narrative before someone else does. She was right, George realized. His years of cultivating a specific public image as the brilliant, driven bachelor CEO who had made good, followed by his strategic marriage to Vanessa, had created interest in his personal life that couldn't be easily dismissed. Sooner or later, someone would connect the dots to Selena and Mateo. I need to talk to Selena, he said, already reaching for his phone. You do, Vanessa agreed, rising. And I need to finalize my plans with Paolo. I've instructed my lawyer to make the divorce as straightforward as possible. I don't want anything from you, George. We both know our marriage served its purpose for both of us. As she prepared to leave, Vanessa paused at the door. For what it's worth, I hope it works out with your family. Paolo has children from his previous marriage. Seeing him with them, she smiled thoughtfully. It's shown me a side of him I never would have known otherwise. Perhaps fatherhood has done the same for you. After she left, George sat heavily on the sofa, the peaceful bubble he'd been living in for the past months suddenly at risk of bursting. He needed to tell Selena about the potential media interest before she was blindsided by it. And he needed to make decisions about how public or private he wanted his newfound family life to be. He drove to Selena's house immediately, finding her in the backyard watering plants while Mateo played with neighborhood friends down the street. George, she greeted him with surprise. I wasn't expecting you tonight. Something's come up, he said, the urgency in his voice causing her smile to fade. Vanessa came back from Milan. She says there's already gossip about us, about Mateo, in some circles. Selena set down the watering can, her expression growing serious. What kind of gossip? Nothing specific yet, George assured her. But people have noticed me at Mateo's events. Questions are being asked. It's only a matter of time before someone connects the dots. Selena sank onto the patio bench, the implications sinking in. I never considered this aspect of your life. The public scrutiny. I've managed to keep a relatively low profile compared to some tech CEOs, George said, sitting beside her. But I'm still a public figure. And a story about a billionaire's secret child is exactly the kind of thing that sells magazines and generates clicks. What does this mean for Matteo? Selena asked, her protective instinct immediately focusing on their son. It means we need to decide how to handle this, George replied. We can try to keep things quiet, but that often backfires. Or we can control the narrative, perhaps give an exclusive interview to a journalist I trust on our terms. Selena stared at him. An interview? About our private life? I know it sounds invasive, George acknowledged. But it might be the best way to protect Matteo from something worse. Paparazzi following him to school, sensationalized stories that he might hear from classmates. Selena was quiet for a long moment, processing. This is the reality of being connected to you, isn't it? This public dimension I never had to consider before. I'm afraid so, George admitted. And I'm so sorry to bring this complication into your lives. To his surprise, Selena reached for his hand. Our lives, George. You're part of this family now, complications and all. The simple statement, acknowledging their unit as a family, filled George with emotion despite the circumstances. We'll handle this together, he promised. I'll do everything possible to minimize the impact on you and Matteo. They decided to be proactive but controlled, a single statement released through George's PR team, acknowledging that he had recently reconnected with his 7-year-old son and was committed to being an active father. No photos, no interviews, a respectful request for privacy. To their relief, the strategy largely worked. There was a brief flurry of business news articles, most focusing on the humanizing aspect of the previously work-obsessed CEO embracing fatherhood, and then the story faded from public interest, overtaken by newer celebrity scandals. Through this unexpected challenge, George was struck by Selena's resilience and pragmatism. Where he had feared judgment or anger at having their private life thrust into public view, she had approached the situation with calm determination to protect their son while acknowledging the reality of George's public profile. You continue to amaze me, he told her one evening as they sat on her back porch, the media storm having largely passed. Most people would have been furious about this invasion of privacy. Selena shrugged. Getting angry wouldn't have changed the situation. And besides, she added with a small smile, I knew who you were when I fell in love with you the first time. The public figure part of your life isn't new to me. George's heart skipped at her casual reference to having loved him. And now, he asked softly, how do you feel now? Selena met his gaze steadily. Now I think I'm falling in love with the man you've become. The father who never misses a soccer game. The partner who helps with dinner without being asked. The person who finally understands what real success looks like. George took her hand, his throat tight with emotion. I love you, Selena. I think I always have, even when I was too blind to see what mattered. When she leaned in to kiss him, it felt like coming home after a very long journey, familiar and new all at once, a second chance he had never expected to receive. 3 days later, George closed on the house on Maple Street. He didn't pressure Selena to move in immediately, understanding her need for independence and careful transitions for Matteo's sake. Instead, he focused on making the house a welcoming space for both of them, a room decorated exactly to Matteo's specifications, complete with a space-themed ceiling and built-in shelves for his engineering projects, a home office for Selena with large windows overlooking the garden, and most importantly, the promised treehouse in the massive oak, built with Matteo's enthusiastic assistance over several weekends. By early fall, their lives had found a new rhythm. George spent most evenings and weekends at the Maple Street house, returning to his penthouse, now on the market, only when late work required it. Selena and Matteo began staying over occasionally, family movie nights that ran late, rainy Saturdays spent playing board games and making cookies. The transitions were gradual, natural, guided by Matteo's comfort and Selena's readiness. One crisp October evening, as they walked through a local pumpkin patch with Matteo running ahead to examine each potential jack-o'-lantern candidate, George dropped to one knee beside a particularly large pumpkin. Selena stopped walking, her eyes widening as she realized what was happening. 7 years ago, I made the worst mistake of my life, George said, his voice steady despite his pounding heart. I chose ambition over love, success over family, fear over courage. I've spent every day since reconnecting with you and Matteo, trying to prove that I'm not that man anymore. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. Selena Solis, You have given me the two greatest gifts imaginable, our incredible son, and a second chance I didn't deserve. I promise to spend the rest of my life being worthy of both." He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant diamond ring. "Will you marry me and make our family complete?" Tears glistened in Selena's eyes as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, George." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Mateo's voice came from behind them. "Finally, can I tell my friends now?" They turned to find their son watching with hands on hips, an exaggerated expression of impatience on his face that dissolved into genuine delight as they beckoned him into a family embrace. That night, after Mateo was asleep, George and Selena sat on the porch swing at the Maple Street house, their house now, or soon to be, fingers intertwined, plans and dreams flowing between them. "I was so afraid to trust this," Selena admitted softly. "To trust you again. To believe people could really change." "I understand that fear," George replied. "I lived with my own version of it for 7 years. Fear of responsibility, of failure, of not being enough. It cost me so much precious time with both of you. But we're here now," Selena said, squeezing his hand. "The three of us. A family. A family," George echoed, the simple word containing everything he had once foolishly believed he didn't need, and now knew he couldn't live without. 6 months later, on a perfect spring day, George stood beneath a flower-covered arch in the backyard of their Maple Street home, watching as Selena walked toward him in a simple white dress, her face radiant with happiness. Beside him stood Mateo, proudly holding the wedding rings on a small pillow, his formal suit a miniature version of George's own. Their wedding was small and intimate. Family, close friends, a few trusted colleagues, a celebration of not just their renewed love, but the journey that had brought them to this moment. As they exchanged vows, George caught Mateo's eye, the boy beaming with satisfaction at seeing his family officially united. Later, as evening fell and guests danced on the patio strung with twinkling lights, George found a quiet moment with his son. "Happy, buddy?" he asked, straightening Mateo's slightly crooked tie. "The happiest," Mateo confirmed with the absolute certainty of childhood. "I always knew you'd come back. Even before I met you." "You did?" George asked, surprised. Mateo nodded solemnly. "Mom used to look sad sometimes when she thought I wasn't watching. I decided that someday I'd find you and tell you to come home and make her happy again." He grinned. "But then you found us instead." George knelt to his son's level, overwhelmed by the simple wisdom in his words. "Sometimes I think you're the smartest one in this family, Mateo." "Obviously," the boy agreed with a cheeky smile. "Can I have more cake now?" As Mateo dashed off toward the dessert table, Selena joined George, slipping her arm through his. "What were you two conspiring about?" "The future," George replied, drawing her close. "And how incredibly lucky I am to have found my way back to where I belong." 1 year later, George sat on the back deck of their home, watching Mateo demonstrate his latest coding project on a laptop. Now 8 years old, his technical skills were advancing rapidly under George's patient guidance, though his approach remained distinctly his own, creative, user-focused, and occasionally unconventional. "See, Dad? When you click here, the game character can collect power-ups that help other players too, not just himself," Mateo explained, pointing to the screen. "Because teamwork is more fun than just winning alone." "That's brilliant, buddy," George said sincerely. "You've thought about the user experience in a way most adult developers miss completely." Mateo beamed at the praise. "Do you think I could make real games someday? Like for your company?" "I think you could do anything you set your mind to," George replied. "But you have plenty of time to decide. No need to choose your career path at 8. "That's what Mom says too," Mateo agreed, closing the laptop. "Speaking of Mom, is she feeling better?" "She was in the bathroom a long time this morning." George smiled, still amazed by his son's perceptiveness. "She's feeling a little better. And we actually have something important to tell you. Why don't you go see if she's ready to come downstairs?" Moments later, Mateo returned with Selena, who looked slightly pale but was smiling as she settled beside George on the deck sofa. "Mateo," George began, taking Selena's hand. "Your mom and I have some news. In about 6 months, you're going to be a big brother." Mateo's eyes widened. "Really? A baby?" Selena nodded. "Yes, Mijo. A little brother or sister for you." "Wow." Mateo breathed, processing this information. Then his practical nature asserted itself. Where will the baby sleep? My room is too noisy because I talk in my sleep sometimes. George laughed. We'll use the guest room across from ours. We can start decorating it soon, and you can help us pick colors and furniture. And can I teach the baby things? Matteo asked, warming to the idea. Like how to build structures and code games. Absolutely, Selena assured him. You'll be the best big brother ever. As Matteo peppered them with questions about babies and his future responsibilities, George felt a profound sense of contentment wash over him. From the worst mistake of his life had come his greatest redemption, this family, this home, this love he had nearly thrown away in pursuit of the wrong kind of success. 7 years ago, he had been a driven, ambitious CEO focused solely on building his empire, believing that wealth and recognition would bring fulfillment. Now, watching his son's excited face as he contemplated life as a big brother, George understood what true wealth looked like, not the billions in his bank accounts or the global recognition of his company, but the immeasurable richness of being present for these precious moments with the people he loved most in the world. When Matteo ran inside to retrieve his tablet, eager to start researching baby room designs, Selena leaned her head against George's shoulder. Happy? She asked softly. Beyond words, he replied, placing his hand gently on her stomach where their second child grew. I spent 7 years chasing success in all the wrong places. Now I finally understand. It was right here all along. This story reminds us that true wealth isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the love we give and receive. Sometimes life grants second chances we don't deserve, opportunities to right our greatest wrongs and find our way back to what truly matters. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe to Lux Love Chronicles with Mr. Wentworth for more powerful stories that remind us what makes life truly rich. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to choose a different path and find your way home to the people who matter most.